The story or stories you are about to hear are to entertain. The writers of these stories may claim they are true, yet they may not be. That is up to you to decide. After all, this world is a strange one. Every animal we know of today had to be discovered at one point. Even the fiercest creatures, like gorillas, bears, and others, had to be stumbled upon by man at some point. Could you imagine the stories they told of these creatures? Well, they might sound a lot like these three stories about people who have sighted unexplained creatures, monsters that defy logic and induce a response of fear or confusion. Now, let's begin. I saw it crawling on my neighbor's roof from plague bacon. These incidents occurred over a period of time when I was younger. However, it was only until recently that I connected the dots. I grew up in Louisiana, right on the outskirts of New Orleans. The city itself has so much history, myths, and intrigue surrounding it that I would be remiss to say that I didn't have other experiences involving spirits and all that. But that's a story for another time. Right after Hurricane Katrina, I was displaced by the storm and ended up staying in Florida for a while. While there, it seemed as though every channel on the news had coverage of the horrific event. People's homes were flooded, the roads were blocked, businesses destroyed, and to make things even worse, there were many reports of people committing some heinous crimes. Part of the news covered people trying to escape the storm and the resulting aftermath. The other half seemed to cover the dark side of humanity. Vandalism, theft, looting, violence, all of that occurred while others were simply trying to survive. To make matters worse, the prisons were destroyed, and a lot of the city's unmentionables started roaming the area, causing more trouble for the people who were simply trying to exist. Some really horrible stuff went on. Like, sure, this experience involves the aftermath of a horrible storm and the possible encounter with something dangerous and unexplained. But I'll never put it past humans to be the darkest, most cruel creatures in existence. The news covered up a lot of it, of course. This is where people begin to say, then how do you know what really happened if there was a cover-up? And to you I'll say this, I was there in the Superdome. I hid from the prisoners when they broke in, and I, being one of the able-bodied people in the area, had to help deal with the people who weren't as fortunate in being able to hide. Coverage about the swamps flooding, animals escaping zoos, as well as creatures from the bayou areas, like alligators and such, were frequent. Many of these dangerous animals made their way into the same broken streets as the ones where there were people simply trying to get back home. So, what I'm trying to say is, all manner of beasts were displaced by the storm, not just humans. But what about the things that we are told don't or shouldn't exist? Is it possible that the storm impacted them as well? A few months after the storm, I eventually moved back to Louisiana, trying to put back the pieces of my own life. I lost a dear friend to looters. My house was in shambles, and the majority of my classmates were off in different cities now. Thankfully, I started dating my now wife from Florida. We would take turns visiting each other every other weekend. It was a long-distance thing, but we made it work. This is relevant to the story, trust me. One week, as I was driving my sister home from the movies, we started talking about lions. She was 13 at the time, and she just got out from seeing the Narnia movie with some friends. We crossed over the small bridge over a canal that led into our subdivision, and as we turned the corner, she said something along the lines of, and Mr. Tumnus started to play a flute. And, wait, what's a tumnus again? I asked. She saw my confused face and continued, he's got like the legs of a goat, but he has horns and doesn't have any hair on his body like Phil. You know, from Hercules. She paused mid-sentence. Oh, did Ashley get a new dog or something? She motioned towards our neighbor's yard. I glanced to the left and saw what looked to be a grayish dog, sort of like a greyhound, sitting in their front lawn. Something about it didn't feel right. It was skinny, like a little too skinny. Its muzzle looked to be flat, and its legs were longer than I thought they should be. But I was no dog expert by any means. I didn't think too much about it at the time. Not sure, I said, as we drove past their house, but I can ask later. We drove off with that dog looking in the direction of our car, almost as if it were following us with its eyes, but I figured that's what animals do, and I cast it off as nothing. Later on, I would text Ashley about her new creepy puppy, but she had no idea what I was talking about. She said, if anything, it was probably some stray that got a whiff of her dog's. Poor thing was probably malnourished if it was as thin as you described, she told me. I wrote it off as whatever and forgot about it entirely for a while. A few weeks later, I was on the phone with my girlfriend, talking about our respective days at school. I walked into the kitchen to grab a coat. Robin, my sister, was browsing her friend's MySpace pages and listening to Lil Wayne on Pandora. Soon as I walked into the kitchen, I could barely hear what my girlfriend was saying, so I asked Robin if she'd lower the music. She begrudgingly complied, after muttering to herself. I grabbed my Coke, a whole bag of chips, and Don't Judge Me, and was making my way back upstairs when I heard Robin's voice. I grabbed my Coke, a whole bag of chips, and Don't Judge Me, and was making my way back upstairs when I heard Robin call to me. She squeaked as I rounded the steps. What's that? What do you mean? I heard something outside. I groaned and told my girlfriend to hold on a moment. I went back down into the kitchen to see Robin peeking out through the blinds. That dog is back. I'm closing up the laptop and heading towards the stairs. I'll be in my room. That thing gives me the creeps. Sure enough, there it was, sitting at the edge of our property. Trying to sound tough, I told my girlfriend I was going to go outside to scare it off, and I'd call her back. In reality, I wanted to see the thing up close, bring it some food if it wasn't hostile. However, if it was, I didn't want her to hear me scream like a baby. I opened the sliding glass door that led towards my backyard and proceeded to walk over to where Robin saw the dog sitting. Now, to get an understanding of our backyard, it had a cement patio that connected to the grass, and at the very end of the yard was a canal. We had cement bases for a fence, but due to the hurricane, all work stopped there. As I approached closer, its gaunt silhouette started to make me feel uncomfortable. It did that thing with its eyes that nocturnal animals do when they reflect light, making it look even more unsettling. I took a deep breath and was about to let out a, "Hey boy, you hungry?" But before those words could leave my mouth, it quickly jolted up and turned its head back toward the canal. For some reason, this caused me to freeze. The way it moved was wrong. It let out this moan, maybe it was a growl. Sounded like the combination between a dog's howl and a goat bleating. It was more melodic though, if that makes sense. I saw its eyes flash that eerie glow again as it spun its body around and darted down toward the canal. It was creepy, sure, but once more I wrote it off as whatever. Fast forward another week or so, and one of Ashley's dogs was found dead in her backyard. Now, I didn't see it myself, but from the way she described it, the poor thing was torn to shreds. Pieces of fur scattered all over in what appeared to be a struggle. The general consensus was that a bobcat or some other wildcat had done it, but she wasn't convinced. But Jocks was a mastiff. She kept repeating, "There's no way some bobcat got to him like that." Now I know what you're thinking. It's probably related to that thing I saw, right? It was outside of her house that one night, too. I mean, the thought crossed my mind, but I didn't want to bring it up around her. Later that same day, I was sitting on my roof. I would crawl out of my window from the second story and recline on the rooftop that hung over the garage. This gave me a good view of the neighborhood. I was telling my girlfriend about all that had happened so far, how I kept hearing strange sounds at night, and about how Jocks was found dead. I was in the middle of telling her how these sounds have been increasing in occurrence these past few days, when I heard it again, right there. It sounded louder, closer. Before I could ask if she heard it as well, she asked, "What the hell was that?" confirming that she had heard it too. I then proceeded to tell her my theory on how it was connected to the creepy dog. When the weekend came, my girlfriend was in town to visit, so I took her and my sister out to dinner. It was a nice meal. Steak, potatoes, soda. The latter is important because none of us had any alcohol during the meal. On the drive home, we were discussing the intricacies surrounding religion and faith when Robin screamed. She pointed to the roof of a nearby neighbor's house. In my shock, I slammed on the brakes to get a better look. That's when we saw it, and I mean really saw it. It was slender, almost to the point of absurdity, and its limbs were outstretched, joints bent in some unnatural posture. It had pale gray fur. Well, not fur, actually. It was skin. Its skin was pale gray and stretched extremely tight over its body. It was quite unnerving to look at. I sat there, with a foot on my brake, as I tried to make sense of what it was. My sister screamed, "Go! I want to go home!" Then the creature froze. Wait, I thought. Did it hear us? No, there's no way it heard us. The creature twitched, turning back to face us, once again hitting me with the eerie glow of its eyes. And then it skittered, like the way a lizard does, body close to the surface, over the other side of the roof, towards their backyard. I quickly called my neighbor as soon as we got home and told him that we saw something on his roof. In an attempt to not sound crazy, I said that it looked to be a huge opossum crawling around the second story. His reply shocked me. Did it look like a monkey? Wait, what? No, it was. The wife and I have been seeing this monkey-looking thing hanging in the trees at night. We called animal control, and they said it was probably some opossum that had escaped from a preserve. But I know what an opossum looks like, and that thing ain't no opossum. I was more than a little confused, I guess. I mean, it looked like a long, skinny dog or something. We just saw it crawl. Yep, that's the one, little man, that's the one. Don't you worry, though, it just sits there, staring at nothing. I figure if it means any harm, it would have done so already. He had interrupted me, I guess, I said. Well, I just wanted to let you know. It's pretty weird looking, he laughed. Well, if it come in here, I'll knock it dead and mount it on the wall. And that was the end of that. Fast forward to a few weeks ago, early 2020. My wife, the girlfriend from the story, and I ended up moving to Florida, became parents, and were living the good life when my sister and parents came to visit us for the weekend. While the grandparents were enjoying putting our daughter to sleep, Robin suggested looking for creepy videos on YouTube. We're horror buffs, so why not, right? We came across a few scary story channels, but then soon came across another YouTube channel. Wish I could say the name of the channel in the video, but he had a numbered list of the creepiest things ever caught on camera. It went through various ghost sightings, unexplained occurrences, and even dabbled into the unexplained creature territory. This YouTuber started to talk about the rake, a creepypasta creature. As with the other items on the list, it had some photos and videos attached, all of which looked eerie until we came across one photo, a photo of a long, emaciated creature sitting on all fours. Almost as an aside, Robin said, "That looks like that thing we saw on the roof. Do you remember that, Kuya?" I looked up and squinted. Yeah, kind of. I'm surprised you remember that. My wife added, "She's right, I remember it as well, and it did look very similar to this." We laughed it off as a strange experience and proceeded to watch the video, which more or less said, supposedly the rake lives within deep forests. Reports have also cited the creature in places like Louisiana. We all froze. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as it all came crashing back. I looked up to see my wife and Robin in similar instances of awe. Well, crap. Now that's creepy, I said. The video proceeded to show more convincing footage of the rake with glowing eyes via a video from a sewer tunnel. You probably know what video I'm talking about. As I watched it, I began to feel uneasy. Those eyes, they pierced through me. I mean, that's exactly what I remember staring back at me from way before. That's even worse, I started. Because that's how I remember the eyes, I cut myself off. Then the creature in the video ducked out of view, moving in that same fluid yet jittery motion as it did on that roof. My wife and my sister froze, both visibly shaken. This sparked a big discussion on cryptids and the like, ending with both my wife and sister telling me to share our story. Someone needs to know something, they said. A thing I forgot to mention earlier was the smell. There was always this dry, musty, rotted smell lingering in the air whenever we remember seeing it, but I couldn't find anything that talked about how the rake smells. So whoever's listening, did we really encounter the rake back home? Is it possible that there's more than one of these things out there? I mean, what else could it be? I know it's hard to explain, but the creature in that video, it was so similar. The movement, those eyes. One does not forget a sight like that. Not at all. Especially once you've seen it on your neighbor's roof. I joined a youth missionary group after high school. Other than going on missions to impoverished areas and visiting disadvantaged communities, we would sometimes be sent to attend something like a summer camp, but with a ton of lectures about faith and physically demanding games and meditation sessions in the middle of thick woods or up on a hill far away from modern civilization. One such camp took us to a mountainous region blanketed by thick foliage where there were no human settlements for at least 15 kilometers in Indonesia. The only reminder of human life up in those mountains were the sporadic presence of farms, mostly fruit orchards, that permeated the forest every few meters. As it wasn't harvest season, no one stayed on the farms nor nearby, so it was just 30 rambunctious teenagers and young adults, with a handful of stern elders for a few nights in a rented manor which was located next to a banana plantation up on a hill with thick forests. The first day we arrived, all of us were excited, because we really needed the break from everyday life. As none of us attending were Indonesian, we failed to realize that having a banana tree nearby, notwithstanding an entire banana plantation, was very inauspicious. As dusk was approaching, I began to feel as though someone not from our group was watching me from the cover of the trees. I looked out at the trees, where the feeling was most intense, but never managed to spot anything weird. That night after dinner, we were told to play a game of group charades. Some of us had to sit on the veranda outside to brainstorm a game plan. It was out there that I suddenly felt a chill on my back. I had my back to the woods. I turned around to look behind me. My gaze fell on several small lights of greenish-yellow color, speckled across different heights of the forest foliage. Some were stationary, and some were moving about slowly while blinking in and out of existence. Noticing that they were the lights of fireflies, I gazed at them for several minutes, but I noticed that the more I looked, the temperature around me seemed to drop a degree or so every few seconds. When a teammate called out to me, I turned my head to answer his question. Then I looked back at the trees. This time the moving lights were gone, only the stationary ones remained. I mentioned what I supposed were fireflies to him, but he, being a science major at university, said it was rare for fireflies to be found up in the hills far from the water source, which we were. I pointed at the trees where I saw the lights, but this time even the stationary lights had vanished. I thought myself lucky to have even seen the rare instance of fireflies being so far away from water, but my teammate shrugged off what I'd said. He acknowledged that the temperature on the veranda felt unnaturally cold, though. We were in a tropical region, after all, and it wasn't cloudy or windy. The following evening, we were again on the veranda playing yet another game when I heard a rather high-pitched female moan. I looked around, asking if anyone else had heard it too. None of the male teammates heard a single thing, but the female teammates said they heard a strange high-pitched sound that was similar to a cat's mating call. The sound repeated itself several times throughout the night, with the pitch getting higher and higher each time. By the third and final night of our stay, some of us were getting spooked. This is when I found out I wasn't the only one who felt being watched when the sky began to get dark. I definitely wasn't alone in feeling the random and sudden drop in temperatures, and there were more than a handful of us at this point who could hear that strange high-pitched sound. That night, I remember it was 3 minutes past 3. I woke up to the sound of a woman's cries, but it didn't sound entirely like she was crying either. It sounded like a combination of crying, laughing, shrieking, and moaning that grew louder and louder as if the person was getting nearer to us at high speed. I looked around to make sure it wasn't anyone in the same room having an emotional breakdown, but everyone was sound asleep. No one in the room was awake except for me, and by then the cries were coming from just outside our window. This was located on the second floor of a manor. Although I couldn't see who it was, I'm very sure that the person was either flying or floating. After all, it was 3 a.m. in the woods, up on a hill 15 kilometers from the nearest village, and we were the second story up from the ground. Who in their right mind wants to mess with a bunch of sleeping kids in the middle of nowhere? The cries gradually faded, and I stayed awake for about half an hour before falling asleep again. In the morning just before leaving camp, our camp counselor, an elderly man who had been there several times now, held a short seminar when he asked if any of us had unusual experiences during our stay. About half of us raised our hands, and he merely chuckled, told us that we weren't the only ones. Apparently, that manor had been well known by the missionary group for unexplained phenomena. Every time they held an event here, attendees would report some bizarre incidents. When we were taken out of those hills by our local guide, I told him of my experience the past few nights. He said it was most definitely a Pontianak. He explained that a Pontianak is the vampire spirit of a deceased pregnant woman who had become vengeful. She floats around at night, looking for blood. A Pontianak often has glowing eyes, usually in the hues of red or green or even yellow. They are known for hanging around dark trees during the night when they're not hunting for blood. Its favorite hideout during the day is within banana trees, where it takes residence in the unripe fruit or within the trunk of the tree. The creepy combination of cries, laughter, shrieks, and moans, they're meant to confuse and lure victims by sounding like a damsel in distress or a child in trouble. Appearance-wise, our local guide said a Pontianak has long hair, sharp claws, fangs, and wears either a green, red, or white dress, in addition to having the aforementioned glowing eyes. It levitates and flies around, looking for prey at night, but some have been known to be out and about during the day too, but have to remain in the shade and less noisy in crowded areas. When he was done telling us about this, I was freaking out. I was in shock, basically, realizing that I may have come close to a real, undead creature. The local guide explained that no one lives near that hill we had our camp on, because it has a large banana plantation and a very old, disused cemetery where the remains of several Pontianaks and those of unborn children are. That's why the manor we stayed in was so affordable, and the cost of the camp was very low. No one else was willing to take up the place because of the location. I shudder every time I recall that horrible sound, and I'm extremely grateful that I didn't try to look out the window, because I don't think I can handle the sight of seeing a floating, dead woman. I don't enjoy camping all that much, but after this encounter, it made me change my mind a bit. It was in the middle of January. My friend Jay called me about wanting to go camping for the weekend. I sighed and told him I'm not much of a camper, but he insisted it'd be fun. He had a good point about me trying new things and all that. Well, he convinced me, so I agreed to join him. He arranged what day and time we'd head off. Fast forward a few days, and I was helping Jay load up his truck, and soon we were on our way. During the drive, Jay mentioned that we're not going to a normal camping spot, rather a secret spot he had been going to since last year. I didn't like the idea of that at first, but at the same time I preferred the quality bro time with Jay, since it had been a while since I got to talk to him last. So I obliged. After an hour had passed, we made it to this secret camp area, and color me impressed. It was a nice small opening with trees surrounding it. Pretty cozy if you ask me. After me and Jay set up camp, we spent the rest of the day catching up and cooking up some canned soup for dinner. Evening came around, and it was getting dark pretty quick. I had to go number one and excused myself. I walked into the forest to find a good spot to do my business. I was smart enough to not go too far. I made sure I could still see the light of the fire from the campsite. After I found a good spot, I did what I had to do, although I had a weird feeling of being watched that whole time. There was no fear or sense of dread. It was just a calming vibe. It's sort of hard to explain. I ignored it and finished up. As I turned around to start heading back to camp, I caught sight of two big glowing blue eyes looking at me from a close-by tree. This surprised me, made me jump a bit even, but I stayed calm. The emotions running through me were curiosity, awe. The eyes blinked once until they began to move slowly towards me. A silhouette of a large, wolf-like thing came into view from what little light the moon gave off. I thought it was a wolf or a large dog, but it wasn't quite that. It was crawling on all fours, sniffing at me, looking very curious. It was about maybe 5 or 6 feet tall. It had darkish gray fur with some white in it. It was slender, but very defined muscularly. The hands ended in sharp claws. I also noticed that the thing was female. She inched closer and started to sniff my coat, cocking her head almost curiously. I was amazed at what I was looking at, but that didn't last long. My friend was calling out for me, and that caused this female wolf thing to look at the direction of my friend, back at me. Then she stood up a bit, licked my forehead, and bounded off into the dark. I was still amazed and trying to process what I saw before Jay found me, asking if everything was all right. I said yeah, but I didn't tell him what I saw. For the rest of the trip, I kept looking out in the forest in hope of seeing this creature again, but it never happened. A shame. Regardless of my experience, I would not recommend assuming these things, or anything like it, are always friendly. If you enjoy camping, if you see something unnatural, always be cautious. Animals are fascinating. Nature has pressured them for millions of years to create creatures of every sort of shape and size, and despite how smart humans have gotten, there are still creatures that elude us. Creatures we still can't understand. In our age of technology and understanding, there are still legends to fear. Good night. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to stay safe out there because this world is full of strange and terrifying things. If you like and enjoyed these stories, then hit the like button, press the notification bell, and subscribe for more spine-tingling content. And we will see you in the next story.